Democrat or a Republican. The Bill of Rights is all about whoever it is, we protect our rights. So at 11:47 that morning, Rand Paul walked out to the Senate floor and began a filibuster. And, you know, more than a few of our Senate colleagues found what he was doing curious, if not quixotic, as he stood up there and stood for principle. Shortly thereafter, Mike Lee and I were the first two to stand in support of Rand Paul. Now, you may not know, that was the first time I had ever spoken on the Senate floor. There is a long tradition in the Senate that freshmen should wait a considerable time before speaking on the Senate floor, and although the press wouldn't tell you it, that was a tradition I had not said a word on the floor. But this was a fight I couldn't sit on the sidelines. And so, the first time I stood on the Senate floor, I had the opportunity to read from Travis's letter from the Alamo. And it so happened the day of that filibuster was the 177th anniversary of the fall of the Alamo. Man. And I told Rand, who happens to be a native Texan, I said, Rand, I have no doubt that if William Barrett Travis and Davy Crockett and Jim Bowie, if the heroes of the Alamo were alive today, they'd be standing shoulder to shoulder with you defending liberty. Right now. I got to read Shakespeare's St. Crispian's Day speech. We few, we happy few, we band of brothers. I got to read the opening monologue from Patton. I had to clean it up a little bit for television. And I got to read Ronald Reagan's 1964, A Time for Choosing speech. As they say in the beer commercial, it don't get no better than that. And something amazing happened during those 13 hours. We saw one senator after another begin coming to the floor. By the end of the night, we had 20 House members on the floor of the Senate. I didn't even know they knew where the Senate was. And during the day, the American people became fixated by C-SPAN. Now, that's not a phrase that occurs naturally in the English language. Fixated by C-SPAN. And we saw men and women all across the country speaking out, getting engaged. Actually, one of the things I got to do in the middle of the filibuster was go to the Senate floor and read tweets that had been given all over the country. My favorite was a woman who tweeted, she said, I'm a grandmother. I've never used Twitter before in my life, but I signed up today to stand with Rand. And I will confess, I'm pretty confident that's the first time tweets have ever been read on the Senate floor. And I'm kind of excited that, Brian, 20 years from now, that means I'm going to be an answer to some really obscure political tweet. But as a result of leaders in Washington standing for principle and uniting the American people to stand with us, the next day the Obama administration was forced to do what it refused to do for 3 weeks, which is put in writing the obvious answer that no, the Constitution doesn't let the U.S. government use a drone to kill U.S. citizens on U.S. soil. A second example. Some of y'all may have noticed there's some Democrats in Washington trying to come after our guns.
Good lifestyle.
You know, you may have seen a certain exchange I had with the senior senator in California. her bill with the Second Amendment. She responded to me, she said, "You don't understand. It's the job of Congress to make laws. And it's the job of the courts to figure out if they're constitutional." And you know what, sadly? I do understand. That has been the attitude of Congress for a long, long time. Her answer reminded me of what Nancy Pelosi said right after Obamacare was passed. Where she was asked, she said, "Where's the basis in the Constitution for this?" And her response was, "Are you serious? Are you serious?" Then Speaker Pelosi's voice, dripping with contempt, that how dare you even ask about the Constitution? And you know what? That contempt is one of the reasons why we call her today then Speaker Pelosi. But you know, Vice President Joe Biden, the nice thing is you don't even have to finish anything. You can just say Joe Biden and you get a laugh. But Vice President Joe Biden had some very helpful advice when it comes to guns. He said, if anyone is attacking your home, just go outside with a double-barreled shotgun and fire 2 barrels in the air. Which is very good advice if it so happens you're being attacked by a flock of geese. Or, for that matter, a drone. You know, all of us were horrified by what happened in Newtown. Heidi and I have 2 little girls, aged 4 and 2. Any parent watching that could not help but be sickened that anyone would commit such a senseless murder of little children. And yet it seemed within minutes of that horrific crime, you had politicians running out trying to take advantage of that tragedy. Trying to take advantage of that tragedy not to act to stop violent criminals, not to act to deter violent crime, not to act to punish violent criminals, but instead to strip away the Second Amendment constitutional rights of law-abiding citizens. Well, President Obama came out with a whole lot of hoopla and said, we're going to pass this big anti-gun agenda. And yet I'm happy to tell you that just over a week ago, Harry Reid publicly announced he can't even get 40 votes for Dianne Feinstein's assault. Rand Paul and Mike Lee and I sent a letter to Harry Reid saying we will use any procedural means necessary, including another filibuster, to stop any bill that violates the Second Amendment right to keep and bear arms. When Republicans stand for principle, we win. Let me give you a third example. The past couple of weeks, the Senate has twice voted on amendments that I introduced to defund and to repeal every word of Obamacare. And you know, when I first announced that I was going to introduce those amendments, we had a closed-door lunch among all the Senate Republicans, and I got to tell you, one after another began yelling at me. They were angry. They were angry for introducing this. I had one of them say, enough already, move on. I thought move on was some left-wing group. But one after the other, they said, listen, we lost the last election, give it up, let's stop fighting this fight.
No. No.
I kind of thought y'all would say that. Well, and I heard them all out, and I said, y'all are entitled to your views, but I'm going to introduce the amendment nonetheless. And I'm going to fight for it because it's the right thing, and we have a job to stand up and fight for liberty, fight for the people, fight for the Constitution, and that's what I'm going to do. And when it came to the Senate floor, twice in a row, 100% of Republicans, all 45, voted to defund Obamacare and to repeal every one. Every one of those Republicans who was yelling behind closed doors showed up and voted yes when the vote came. That's what happens when we stand for principle. The second thing we need to do is champion growth and opportunity. You know, my number one priority every day in office is working to restore economic growth in this country. For the last 4 years, our economy has averaged 0.8% growth. Since World War II, the average has been 3.3% a year. We're a quarter of our historic average. There's only one other period since World War II where we've had 4 consecutive years of less than 1% growth on average. That was from 1979 to 1982. That was coming out of Jimmy Carter. The same misguided policies we're seeing today were the policies that were in effect then. And in 1981, a very, very different president came into office. Reagan, like Obama, inherited a lousy economy. Reagan had double-digit unemployment, 22% interest rates, gas lines going around the block. And yet Reagan's policies were the exact opposite of the Obama policies. Instead of jacking up taxes, Reagan cut taxes and simplified the tax code. Instead of exploding spending in the national debt, Reagan restrained the growth of spending. And instead of unleashing regulators like locusts to destroy small businesses and kill jobs, Reagan restrained regulation. And the result was some of the most incredible economic growth this country's ever seen. 4th year of Reagan's presidency was 1984. By then, does anyone know what GDP growth was in 1984? 7.2%. Last quarter, our economy grew 0.4%. One set of policies work and one doesn't. Now, what does that mean in real terms? What does that mean not in terms of abstract numbers that are on an Excel spreadsheet and make all the CPAs in the room happy? What does that mean in concrete terms? Job. If we had had the exact same growth that Reagan had, inheriting a lousy economy just like Obama did, by today, there would be an additional 7 million new jobs. 7 million new jobs is the equivalent of a new job for every man, woman, and infant child in Chicago, Houston, Philadelphia, and Boston. That's what 7 million new jobs is. And why does growth matter so much? Because growth is foundational to every other problem we've got. If you want the 23 million people who are out of work to get back to work, we need growth. If you want to turn around our out-of-control deficits and our unsustainable debt, we need growth. If you want to ensure we maintain the strongest military in the world to protect our national security, we've got to have growth. And growth is fundamental for opportunity. In my opinion, every Republican candidate for office and every Republican office holder ought to have 2 words written on their hand: growth and opportunity. You know, a lot of us have asked why we lost in 2012. In 2 words, I think we lost in 2012 because of 47%. That's exactly what it is. And I don't mean Romney's comment where he said at a fundraiser the 47% who are dependent on government, we don't have to worry about them. I don't mean that one comment. Anybody, if you stick a TV camera in your face 24 hours a day, anybody's going to say something ill-advised. I think Mitt Romney is a good and decent man who ran very, very hard. What I mean is the narrative of the last election. narrative of the last election was the 47% who do not currently pay income tax, many of whom are dependent on government. We don't have to worry about that. I got to tell you, I can't think of an idea that is more opposite what we as conservatives believe than that. The essence of the conservative philosophy is understanding that in a free market system, anybody can start with nothing and achieve anything. For a long time, I've been advocating what I call opportunity conservatism, which is that every policy we think about, we talk about, we defend, should focus like a laser on opportunity. How does it impact the least off among us? How does it ease the means of ascent up the economic ladder? You know, the current economic problems we have don't fall uniformly across the population. College graduates today, their unemployment rate is 3.8%. If you're a college graduate with a strong skill set, you've got a relatively robust labor market. People who haven't graduated high school, unemployment rate is over 12%. Hispanics, the unemployment rate has climbed to nearly 10%. African Americans to over 14%. Young people aged 16 to 19, the unemployment rate is over 25%. When you have policies from the federal government that are pounding small businesses, when you have high taxes and high regulation that are making it harder and harder for small businesses to survive, the people who get hurt the most are those who are the most vulnerable among us. Listen, if you pound the economy and pound small businesses, and 2/3 of all new jobs come from small businesses, the people who lose out are not the CEOs. You know what? The CEOs tend to do fine. The people who lose out are the kids who are just getting started, just beginning on the first or second rung of the economic ladder, starting to get their skills. They're the ones that lose their jobs. They are the people who have been most hurt by the Obama economy. As far as I'm concerned, Republicans, we are and should be the party of the 47%. Now, let me give you an example of what I mean by opportunity conservatism. The best slogan of the presidential campaign, I think, was Mitt Romney's slogan, "You built that." It was in response to Barack Obama's very revealing comment, "You didn't build that business." Now, I thought that was great, but it could have been a whole lot better. To whom was "You built that" directed? It was directed to the 53%. It was directed to those who've already built their business. How much better would it have been if instead Romney had said, "You can build that"? Because what Obama was saying is you can't. We have got to champion those that are struggling for a better life. When you take Obamacare, who's been hurt by Obamacare? If you're a young person right now coming out of school, because of Obamacare, the odds are substantially higher you won't be able to find a job. Because more and more employers, and particularly small businesses, are not hiring or are laying people off. If you are lucky enough to find a job, the odds are substantially higher that job won't provide health insurance. Because more and more small businesses and employers are dropping health insurance because of Obamacare. And if you're lucky enough to get a job and to have health insurance, the odds are virtually 100% that your premiums are much, much higher. 3 years ago, when Obamacare was being debated, President Obama promised the country, he said, "By the end of my first term, the average health insurance premiums for the American family will drop by $2,500. Now, has anyone in this room experienced that? In fact, what has happened is they didn't drop a penny. Instead, they have risen by $3,000. That's a $5,500 swing coming out pockets of hardworking Americans who are struggling to make ends meet. And who does it hit the most? It hits the most those that are least able to pay it. You know, during the debate on Obamacare, I read an article from a newspaper out of Oklahoma that was quoting a single mom in Oklahoma who was working at a fast food restaurant. And the fast food restaurant, the entire chain, had forcibly reduced the hours of every employee to 29 hours or less, because 30 hours is the cutoff for falling under Obamacare. And the article explained the fast food restaurants would go out of business if they didn't reduce the employees' hours. They were forced to do that. And this single mom said, you know, I've got 2 little kids at home. I can't feed my kids on 29 hours. And neither can the other single moms who are working with me flipping burgers, trying to make ends meet. We can't either. Let me ask you, how often do you hear Republicans talking about this stuff? How often do you hear Republicans talking about we need to champion the ability of somebody to start with nothing and achieve more? It's what we believe. And yet our leaders are not very good at getting that talk. I want to wrap up with 2 observations. Number 1, a reason for optimism. If you sit down and list who are the brightest stars, who are the leaders of the Republican Party nationally, who excites you? You come up with names like Marco Rubio, like Rand Paul, like Mike Lee, like Pat Toomey, like Ron Johnson. Let me make a point that's really quite striking. 5 years ago, not a single one of them was Republicans. I am hard-pressed to think of another time in modern history when that's been the case. When the leaders who are leading the fight are almost without exception a new generation of leaders that has stepped forward right now into the breach. And I'll tell you something else that is striking. If you look at the new generation of leaders, all of them were kids when Reagan was president. And you know, it's much like if you grew up learning to play basketball when Michael Jordan was the most dominant basketball player on earth. Every one of us wanted to be like Mike. I refer to this generation of leaders as the children of Reagan, because you can see echoes of President Reagan's leadership style in the new leaders. If you look at how they communicate, it is positive, hopeful, optimistic, unifying, appealing to our better angels. It's not mean, nasty, divisive. It's saying we can come together and get back to the founding principles that made this country great. That's one of the reasons I'm so optimistic, because that's how we win the argument. Margaret Thatcher famously said, first you win the argument, then you win the vote. And I think we're starting to get out there and win the argument. The final thing I want to say to you is 11 weeks ago, I stood on the Senate floor with my hand on the family Bible, taking the oath of office. And I couldn't help but think back to 1957. 1957 is when my dad fled Cuba. After being imprisoned and tortured, came here with nothing. Not speaking English, 18, washed dishes, making 50 cents an hour. And what I thought is if someone had come up to that 18-year-old kid and suggested to him that 55 years hence, his son would be sworn into office as a United States Senator representing the great state of Texas. That would have been unimaginable. To that teenage immigrant, that would have been beyond anything he could have conceived. the incredible promises. Of the incredible promise in the history of the world. There has never been a nation that has served as a beacon of hope to the world for so long. Every one of us, we are the children of those who risked everything for liberty. That's what it means to be an American. No nation on earth has allowed so many millions to have nothing and achieve anything. And what gives me strength every day, what gives me encouragement every day, is knowing that each of you are standing up for that liberty. That you're here tonight, you're not home watching the Final Four. I hope you're DVRing. But you're here standing up because you love this country, you love our state, you love our freedom, and you want to make sure, as I do, that our kids and grandkids have every bit the same freedom and opportunity and prosperity we have been blessed to have. And so every day in Washington, I am given strength and sustenance by knowing that I'm standing shoulder to shoulder with each of you as together we are fighting to restore that shining city on a hill that is the United States of America. Thank you, and God bless.
Senator has graciously agreed, if you've got some questions you'd like to ask him.
I'm happy to answer or dodge any question you have.
What about Benghazi?
Yes. A terrific question. What about Benghazi? I wish a lot more people were asking that question.